Does God want a separation of church and state? Should Christians be voting biblical principles? Does it really matter who you vote for? Join Pastor Jerry Cook as he endeavors to answer these and many other questions over the next hour on Politics in the Pulpit. And now, Pastor Jerry Cook.
Good afternoon and welcome to Politics in the Pulpit. This is your holy host, the Bishop of Santa Clarita, here on your hometown station, AM 1220 and FM 98.1. I want to get right into our show today because our guest may have to bow out a little early before calling back in a little bit later, Lord willing. But excited to have with us this afternoon Jennifer Horn. Jennifer Horn grew up in the radio business. She started working for her dad at CRN Digital Radio Network. She is currently the host of The Morning Answer with Grant Stitchfield on AM870 and also the Inland Empire Answer, which used to host with Don Dix, who has gone home to meet his Savior. Jen, good to have you here this afternoon.
Oh, Pastor Jerry, it is great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me. I feel like this is such a treat.
You know what? All I can say is this. If I was someone more special, maybe that other thing you've got going on, you could have said, hey, we're canceling that.
Oh, you know, believe me, it has been a comedy of errors, but we'll make it all work out. I promise you that.
Absolutely. Well, let's just start a little bit about Jen Horn, considering that a lot of my listeners listen to you and get a lot of their information from the Morning Answer. Where does Jen Horn get her authority from? What informs your worldview, Jennifer? What allows you to say this is right, this is wrong? Give us a little background on Jen Horn.
You know, it's really interesting. Well, the little background is that I was a very shy kid. I never thought for a second that I was going to be in radio, never. But my dad was in the radio business, and I grew up watching him and obviously learning a lot from him and seeing what he's done and just how he really operates himself. And so I was watching that. I always thought I'd be kind of behind the scenes, but, you know, fate has an interesting way or God actually has an interesting way of throwing things in front of us and challenges, I think. And one day he was running late for a radio show, and there was no one else at our studio, and I had to fill in for him. It was Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving, and traffic was terrible, and he was stuck, and it was scary, but I went in and opened up the microphone and started going. And the whole hour went by, and I went out of the studio, and I saw him sitting at his desk. And I said, well, why didn't you come in and get me? And he said, because you were doing such a great job, I just wanted to let you go. And so I started practicing a little bit more and started in the radio business with Doug Steffen on the Good Day Show years ago. And every single day, to talk about my worldview, every single day I am inspired by my family. I am inspired by my amazing group of colleagues, my friends. But I start every day driving to work. This is true, in my car, and I say a little prayer, and I ask Jesus to just direct me in his way, to show me what the truth is, to show me what is right and what's wrong. Every time I do my show, I always want to inform, and I want to make people laugh and feel good, but I always want to give them the truth from my perspective. So really what you see is what you get, or what you hear is what you get from me in real life, too.
Well, Lord willing, you keep your eyes open while you're driving, praying, so...
I do. I don't actually do the shut-eye prayer when I drive, which is good. That was, you only make that mistake once.
Yeah, we don't need any more lunatic drivers on the 210 freeway. That's all I got to say. So.
Although I will tell you that I think that there are some people that could actually drive better with their eyes closed.
No, I completely agree with that. I completely agree. Hey, I wanted to ask you also, the first time I ever heard you, Jen, was with Brian Whitman. And, of course, I go all the way back to Ben Shapiro, and I forget her name, Heidi something, but anyway.
Alicia
Heidi Krause.
Alicia Krause, yes.
Yeah, so I go way back with the Morning Answer on this, listening a long time ago when I was still living in Candy Country, but started listening to you when you teamed up with Brian Whitman. How was that relationship, considering that I wouldn't consider him like ultra-liberal. I guess he'd be more of a Bill Maher, middle-of-the-road liberal, old-school liberal.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely a more moderate liberal. And Brian and I got along so great. And the first day we worked together, we knew we had instant chemistry. And there was a trust there, I think, between the two of us. And that still exists today. We aren't partnered up anymore, but I will tell you that we still talk. In fact, I was just texting with him this morning because he sent me a bit that we did years ago. And I don't know that there's anybody on the planet that can make me laugh like Brian Whitman. And that was part of his charm, is that whether you agreed with his politics or not, he was funny, and he'd always have the conversation with you. And I feel like what we did on that version of the Morning Answer, because he was the liberal and I was the conservative, is that we showed people that you can talk to one another and that it's okay to talk and that you can even argue a little bit, but that you can still love each other at the end of the day. And I felt like that was a really important version of the show, because so many times now, and you know this, Pastor Jerry, if there are disagreements, people don't even want to talk. They just want to separate themselves into each other, into their own corners, and that doesn't solve anything. We can't turn our backs on one another, and we're never going to change anything if we can't win people's hearts and minds.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a little bit about the political scene today, especially in the last, or the evolution of that political scene over the last 10 or 15 years. We are fond of saying as conservatives that the left has definitely evolved and become far more leftist.
Yes.
We say things like, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jamal Bowman, all these folks are just nuts. And we see the trend line of the Democratic Party kind of going in that direction as well. But I think we would also agree that the Republican Party is different today than it was maybe under Paul Ryan or a John Boehner. And just speak to that, if you would, that dynamic of both parties actually evolving in a micro sense, one, literally going off the cliff and one becoming a bit more populist. Talk to that extent.
Yeah, I think definitely the Democrat Party is far more left than my grandparents' Democrat Party. My dad's parents were some of the most amazing people I know, and they were registered Democrat until they died. Now, they voted Republican, probably from Reagan on, but I think the party left them, and the party that they probably signed up for in the 40s and 50s, definitely not the same. But I think more interesting is what's happened with the Republican Party. And I think that the Republican Party finally woke up, and I think we are still in the middle of that awakening. And I think they are trying to connect more with voters. For a long time, politicians, I think, operated to keep themselves in power. They operated to keep the norms and the status quo. And I think today's Republicans, or at least the successful ones, and this is very much in the same vein as President Trump, know that they can't just operate for their own good. They've got to operate for the people. And so I think that's why you're seeing the shift for blue-collar voters to the Republican Party, different minority groups, because I feel like we're finally doing a better job identifying with the people who need representation. And, we were forgotten for a long time, and I'm talking about all of us, by politicians who are just operating to keep the status quo, and that's not acceptable anymore. And I think that's where you see the shift between the grassroots and the establishment candidates. And more, I think those establishment candidates are losing power by the day.
We're speaking to Jennifer Horn from the Morning Answer and also the Inland Empire Answer on AM870. So good to have you on, Jen. And again, if you need to bow out here in a minute or so, just give me a quick warning. But I wanted to quickly just ask a question about Merrick Garland. Obviously, the breaking news today was that Merrick Garland was held in contempt. We know that Eric Holder was held in contempt back during the Obama days, and nothing happened then. Do you think this is basically just party line vote here, and really not much is going to happen unless we get power in 2025?
I'm glad that they did it. I do think that a lot of this can be performative, but I do think it will matter if they get power, if we win power back, or if we continue to hold power in the House of Representatives. This had to be done to send a message. But what Democrats do that we don't do is that they carry out on their threats. I mean, you've got Peter Navarro in prison. You've got Steve Bannon, who's going to be going to jail on contempt charges, and this is probably not going to be the same tune for Merrick Garland. Republicans will probably back off, but I think it's important to lay the groundwork, because every single headline you can get in this vein will wake someone up and show people why they are not being transparent. And that's what's really important here. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Right now, we are in a time when people are trying to purposely mislead the American people. And so we need to do everything we can, even if it's just to grab some headlines, to wake one more person up and say, maybe they aren't telling us the whole story.
Yeah. I'll ask you this last question. I'll let you go for this segment, Jen. And again, appreciate you calling in today. obviously, I've been pastoring for 22 years. I have been politically involved in a lot of ways over the course of the last decade of my ministry. And I just think that pastors need to get involved. In fact, the two most hated topics are politics and religion. I think they actually mix. But from your perspective, I mean, I know you've spoken to Alan Jackson. You've probably had some interactions with our friend out there in Chino. But
Jack
Hibbs. Have pastors and churches kind of let the culture wars run roughshod over them in the last few years? And do you think pastors are finally starting to wake up to the fact that, hey, we better say something?
Yes, and I think COVID probably was the big catalyst for that, especially for us here in California, right? We had people who could go to Home Depot, but they couldn't go to church. They couldn't celebrate their faith with their community. And I think that was a moment where, again, people were kind of maybe slowly peeking their eyes open, and then all of a sudden the California governor just accelerated things. And I think Pastor Jack Hibbs is a hero. I think he has really decided to organize his church, people of faith, not necessarily behind, Republican or Democrat, but really behind key issues that should matter to people of faith. And so I applaud what he's doing. He's getting into ballot harvesting. He's getting his voice heard on certain initiatives. And we need every church to be stepping up and doing the same thing, because I'll tell you, the one thing that Democrats do time and time again, and that leftists do even more than the party, is that they organize, and they organize far better than Republicans do. And so it's time when I think conservatives, people of faith, and a lot of times that goes hand in hand these days, we come together and we start helping each other get our vote out. I mean, when you see the numbers and kind of the lack of activity from people who believe in something greater and think, well, maybe I don't have to play in the now. We absolutely do, because we are one step away, one breath away from losing so many of our freedoms if we're not engaged and an active participant right now in the process.
Jennifer, thank you for calling in. If you're able to call in a little bit later, we'd love to have you do so. And we just enjoyed our conversation today. One of the things I like about you, Jennifer, is you're approachable. Obviously, if you're able to come back on a little bit later, we'll talk a little bit about how we got to know one another, at least the first or second time.
Do you mind? And I promise I will do that. Is that okay?
Hey, listen, I am sure getting on the line with Gavin Newsom is probably more important than talking to me.
Let me just tell you, he's much more orange than Gavin Newsom.
There's no doubt about that. Thank you, Jen. We'll definitely look forward to have you call in later.
We'll talk to you in just a few minutes. Thank you so much, Pastor Jerry. Appreciate it.
I appreciate that. Again, Jen Horn with the Morning Answer and the Inland Empire Answer. And, the first time I heard her, I said with Brian Whitman, but actually I listened to her when she was on the Inland Empire with Don Dix. And I wanted to ask her a little bit about Don Dix passing, which, of course, has been a couple of years now, maybe even longer. But obviously that had a huge impact upon her. But if you are ever in drive time and you're, on the other side of the hill here in L.A., I'm sure many of you listen to AM870. And one of the things that I had to get used to was just trying to get used to listening to Grant Stinchfield, because Grant, I don't know, I guess I didn't like his voice initially. I've gotten used to him since then. I did like Brian Whitman. I did, enjoy Ben Shapiro, especially when he was on AM870 before, of course, he became the juggernaut that he is today. But Jennifer has a sweetness about her that I think is good for the conservative side. And there's not as many talkers, female talkers, conservative-wise. Obviously, Laura Ingraham was on the radio when I first heard her way back in 2000. Now, of course, she's number 2 or number 3 on Fox. And there's just a handful of others. I used to listen to Dr. Laura Schlesinger, whom was kind of apolitical, and then kind of took a political tone towards the last 3 or 4 years of her show on AM640. And then, things kind of blew up from there, and the left kind of attacked her, and, the rest is history. But it's great to have those types of voices. The other thing that happened yesterday is Hunter Biden was guilty on all charges. Now, what we need to understand as conservatives is whether or not Hunter Biden is actually going to be held to account in the same way that Donald Trump is going to be held to account. I do find it also interesting that Hunter Biden's trial that for the actual guilty verdict is going to be set for September, whereas Trump's is in July. And so I guess we'll find out whether or not there is a balance here when it comes to our justice system. The other thing that I'm noticing is how the left is defending the Hunter Biden guilty verdict by suggesting that Joe Biden is a loving father and all these kinds of things. And by the way, he might be. But the left came to the defense of Hunter Biden and started to play the sob story and play the violin about Joe Biden and Hunter being a drug addict and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is, folks, one of the things that I thought of when I heard the guilty verdict yesterday on all 3 charges was it was a way to kind of dispel this notion that the conservatives have been saying that there's this 2-tiered justice system. Trump was found guilty on 34 counts. Now Hunter Biden, who is the son of the sitting president, who is a Democrat, has been found guilty on all charges. Now you can't go out there and say there's a 2-tiered justice system because a Republican has been charged and found guilty and a Democrat has been charged and found guilty. And so I wouldn't put it past the Democrats and the left for them to have thought about this a long time ago, knowing that Trump would go to trial and that the right would use the 2-tiered system and talk about that and say it was unfair to conservatives. And they needed a scapegoat. They needed a sacrificial lamb. And who better than the sitting president's son, who everyone loves to hate? And by the way, one of the things that we learned very clearly was that laptop, it's real. Not just the laptop itself, but the contents on that laptop. But yet all of those 51 intelligence officers still stand by their word that they had no problem signing that it was a Russian disinformation. A couple of shameless plugs. I usually do this at the top of the hour, but we had to kind of get Jen in there real quick. But June 29th, for those of you who want to come out to an outdoor event, this will be at the Freedom's Way Baptist Church. You can find us online at freedomswaybaptistchurch.org. This will be the Independence Day concert with the Santa Clarita Valley Concert Band under the direction of Tim Duran. We've done this for the last couple of years now, and we're hoping that that consistency will bring out more and more people. Again, this will be an outdoor event. We will have chairs provided for you, but if you prefer to bring your own chair, something a little bit more comfortable, we're not going to be against that. There will be some water provided, and of course, donations will be asked for. They'll be accepted. We won't be begging for it, but there will be a bread box there if you'd like to give. All the proceeds will go to the Santa Clarita Valley Concert Band. And again, that is June 29th, and that will be at 6 p.m. that evening. Also, the very next day, June 30th, we will have our annual Red, White, and Blue Sunday at Freedom's Way Baptist Church. And this coming Red, White, and Blue Sunday, we will be featuring Nathan Hochman, whom we had the pleasure of talking to last week on this show. And he will be taking a few minutes to address our congregation and those online who are watching and talking a little bit about his possible win over George Gascon, which, of course, we're praying for exceedingly. And also, we have some local folks coming on over the next few weeks. Patsy Ayala, who is running for city council here in Santa Clarita, will be joining our show. I believe it's either next week or the following week. And so we're excited about having Patsy come on. And then also, if you remember a few weeks ago, we had a gentleman by the name of Steve Hill who came in third for the congressional district 27th Congressional District right here. And he was running as a Democrat, but he's also, by the way, a Satanist. And we had him for the entire hour a few weeks ago. And we're going to have him back on towards the end of July. But this time, we're going to talk a little bit more about his worldview, or how he has developed his worldview, and offer some challenges, as I'm sure he'll offer some challenges to my biblical worldview. And so it'll be a respectful conversation, but at the same time, I think it'll be something that many of you will probably enjoy listening to as we have a conversation back and forth. Yesterday, some video has resurfaced, or surfaced, I should say, damning video footage going around of Speaker Nancy Pelosi from January 6, 2021, where she admitted, quote, in this video, "I take responsibility for not being more prepared for the events of that day." It was a video that was, I don't know, I guess shot on a cell phone in a vehicle on the day of January 6th. And one of the law professors that I respect greatly is Jonathan Turley, who, of course, is featured prominently on Fox News. And Jonathan, by the way, is not a Republican conservative. He would be considered more of an old-school liberal. But he had particularly strong words, not merely for Pelosi, but for the members of that select committee, if you remember this a couple of years ago, who failed to publicly disclose this footage. Don't you find it interesting, folks, that here we are 2 years removed from this J6 Select Committee, and they could not find or did not disclose this video? I'm sure they had it. I'm sure that if you asked Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger, they down deep, they know they had access to this, but this was not going to further their narrative. So it didn't show up until 2 years later. And Jonathan Turley said this on X. He said, quote, "Had Pelosi and others accepted National Guard support and installed fencing, as was done at the White House, it is doubtful that the riot on January 6th would have occurred, or any disruption would have been far more limited in scope." As Turley argued in his post, the event of January 6th might not have gotten so out of hand if Pelosi had acted. The members of the Select Committee helped her cover it up. And folks, all I can tell you is Jonathan Turley is one of those guys that, as I said at the top here, that I respect, and he just happens to come off as very credible. Another key point of Turley's address is the left's hypocrisy when it comes to the outrage involved. Just months before January 6th, Lafayette Square faced out of control protests in the days following George Floyd's death. The National Guard was called in for that situation, with Pete Hegseth detailing the harrowing experience in The War on Warriors, which is a book that was previewed, by the way. Then President Donald Trump had to be taken to safety, if you remember that, for which he received severe mockery with the situation also being the source of misinformation. And Turley went on to talk about how if the same protocols would have been followed, then obviously January 6th would not have looked the way it looked. And you know, folks, I'm a Christian. I'm a conservative. And I'll just tell you that from the outset, the look of January 6th, it doesn't look good, right? If these were Democrats and we were conservatives, we might have been throwing rocks at them as they are throwing rocks at us. But one of the things I have to do is I have to take a deep breath and ask myself the question: how were these folks feeling on that day? I hate to say that because I'm not one of these touchy-feeling kind of guys. But I feel like there was a tinder box ready to just go up in flames on that particular day. And we were already, in the the wake of the November election, and many of us went to bed with Trump winning, and 4 or 5 days later, all of a sudden, all those leads dissipated, and Biden eked it out in basically 3 of the battleground states, right? And the weeks leading up to January 6th was just, unfortunately, very ripe for things to take place. I do not believe that what took place on January 6th was a, quote, insurrection, because insurrections happen with bayonet and bombs and guns, and there were no bombs, bayonets, and guns by the conservatives and right-wing protesters that were there. However, there was a bomb, and if you listen to Bongino, he's got some interesting takes on the bomb that was planted at the DNC in reference to Kamala Harris and all of the things that were going on there. He's got more of a better handle on that information than I would. But I just know that something took place, and I believe that it was kind of pre-programmed for that uproarious situation to take place the way it did. But the fact is, here we are, several years later, and all of a sudden we have this, quote, found footage of Nancy Pelosi making it clear and sounding at least very resolved in her mind that, had she have done more, she wanted to make sure the National Guard was there. Folks, all I can tell you is just be aware that more of these things are going to start trickling out, especially as we get closer and closer to the election. Speaking of the election, last night there were elections across, I think, about 4 or 5 states, Maine, the Dakotas, and several other states had their primaries and some of their congressional elections as well. Obviously, Donald Trump did very well. It's already a fait accompli. He's the nominee for the Republican Party. Joe Biden, of course, is the nominee for the Democratic Party. And what basically took place last night was, some of the things we're really wanting to look at were the congressional races. And one of those congressional races that we were looking at was Nancy Mace in South Carolina. And obviously Nancy Mace has had a love-hate relationship with President Trump. Here in the last year or so, it seems like she's kind of made a bit of a turn for the best. But she won resoundingly against the hand-picked candidate of Kevin McCarthy. And of course, if you remember, Nancy Mace was one of those individuals who voted for the ouster of Kevin McCarthy. And so Kevin had a bit of an axe to grind with Nancy, but she won that race going away. It was essentially a rout. The other thing that's very interesting as well is there was rumblings today about whether or not Trump would be picking his VP before the convention or will present the VP pick during the convention. And I'm wondering what your thoughts out there are for a Trump VP. Now, many of us, especially Christians, felt a little better about voting for Trump in 2016 when we didn't know a whole bunch about President Trump other than a lot of his rhetoric, which, of course, some of us liked, some of us didn't. I kind of liked it. But we were a little concerned about his Christian bona fides, if you will, and so he wisely chose Mike Pence as his running mate. And I think that was probably the best choice he could make at the time. We are now being joined again by Jen Horn from The Morning Answer. Jen, are you there?
I am. Thanks so much, Pastor Jerry. Sorry about that.
Was that a great conversation that you had, or what?
It was my favorite, actually. No, my favorite was talking to you today. That's
That's
my favorite
great.
call.
So we were just talking about the potential vice presidential pick for President Trump. I was wondering who your shorthand pick would be.
Oh, gosh, it's such a great question. Well, of course, my heart is Larry Elder because he is my friend, ran for president. I think he'd bring great things to President Trump. But if you look at his short list, there's some intriguing people. You know, for a long time, I thought it would be nice for him to have a female vice president. Not that we play identity politics like the left does, but I love Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She's worked with President Trump before. I think she would be a great choice. But as a first couple of year governor in her first term, I'm not sure she's ready to go. I love Tim Scott. I think he's great. Ben Carson, absolutely solid. Really, his short list is filled, I think, with incredible people. J.D. Vance has done a lot to bring him tech money, big tech. But I hate to see people leave the floor of the Senate where we really might need them because we know what's going to happen the minute President Trump gets elected, and that is that impeachment will begin. So
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's some great names, and I think there's great possibilities. Where are you leaning on this? I always like to get that answer from you, too.
Well, you know, I think that the VP list that Fox News and all the rest of the alphabet channels are promoting, I think it's a head fake. And I think it's a head fake from the Trump guys. The reason why I think is because I think Trump is going to completely surprise us with his choice. I was never thinking of Mike Pence in 2016, not even for a moment. The fact that you mentioned Larry Elder is actually quite intriguing because I actually started thinking that in the last few days myself. When he ran in the recall in 2021, we actually had Larry at our church, and we did a big rally for him with several candidates here, including, of course, your friend and mine, Mike Garcia. And, you know, I loved Larry, and I thought he was going to just bowl right over. And so when you mentioned that, I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe we're tracking in the same way. He might be the sleeper surprise that Trump might pull out of his hat. That's just my thinking.
I was really surprised that Tulsi Gabbard was not on the list as well. Now, I have to tell you that I think that Tulsi is one of the people who's doing it for the right reasons, but she has just recently become a Republican and left behind. A few years ago, she was running as a presidential pick for the Democrats. So I don't know if I want her one breath away from the White House yet, but I really thought for a while that she would be on his short list because she brings a lot of what I think President Trump is looking for, and that's maybe some youth. She is female. She also, I mean, they're going to make the top issue of election because it's all they have, reproductive rights. And so maybe to have a strong woman on the ticket with him, he could try to brush off some of the naysayers. But who knows? I really think it's open, and I think you could be right. The Trump campaign is so organized this year, unlike they've ever been in 2016 or in 2020, that we are being let know what they want us to know. And I think that's what we have to remember. He is always one for surprise. So I think anything could happen.
So real quickly, I want to ask you a question about the polls because Kurt Schlichter wrote a great column for Town Hall called "Trump is Doing Crazy Well, Time to Get Suspicious." Right. And I actually think that Kurt is onto something here because I started thinking, I don't know if you watch any of those Red Eagle Politics and On Point Politics on YouTube where they project how many, this big red wave for Trump and that he's going to, win Minnesota, New Mexico, and Virginia. But obviously the polls are trending in the right direction. I mean, there was a poll out with Fox News where Trump is neck and neck, 48-48 in Virginia. He's within striking distance in Minnesota. I think there was some polling in New Mexico a few days ago that showed him within a couple points or something like that. And even in, places like deep blue New York and New Jersey. Do you think this is a psyop on us, Jen, or do you think that there's some legitimacy to this?
I actually think that there's some legitimacy to this. Look, I always say be very wary of the polls because polls are done by media groups that have ulterior motives. But you cannot deny that and I've been doing a lot of this, you look at the polls and you see a head-to-head matchup, Trump is up. You see across the board in a head-to-head, we're in a 5-person matchup, Trump is up even more. And it seems that Kennedy is taking away some of the votes from Biden, the popular vote level, at least, head to head, nationally. But what I always tend to look at is the swing states. And right now, President Trump is doing pretty well in the swing states. But he does lose a little bit of his polling when Kennedy is in the race, particularly in those swing states. So if I were President Trump kind of moving forward, I may try to make a deal with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just to make sure he's not going to be a factor. That's number one. Number two, I think what you have to look at is demographic polls. And when you see that Trump is doing better with young people and black men, and he is at 23 or 25% with black men, depending on the polls that you look at, that's extremely powerful. We have often said that if Trump got 12% of the black vote, there's no way that the Democrats could win the election. So I do think there's something to the polls, but I think you have to look at every angle. And right now, every angle is suggesting that President Trump is doing better. But you also have to make sure that we still show up, that we are still keeping our eyes open, because the Trump campaign knows that not all of the election integrity issues have been taken care of. And so they're telling people that they need to outperform by 5% in order to make up for any of the bad behavior, the crazy stuff that could happen as we get closer to Election Day. So I think they are in the right direction. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we don't have to work our tails off to try to get President Trump back in the White House.
If you are a regular of the Morning Answer, every Thursday, you are going to hear our Congressman Mike Garcia come on, and his intro music for the Morning Answer sounds a little like this. Is that about right, Jen?
That's about right. You got it. I mean, it's not only do we love to have Congressman Garcia on the show every week, but we also love it because he's got the best theme song.
Yeah, one of the best Tupac songs, right, of the last several years, no doubt. But obviously, I get to listen to our congressman here, and one of the things I like about our congressman, if I could just speak about him for a moment, Jen, is he's an approachable guy. When he ran in 2019 against Katie Hill, and of course Katie Hill basically shot herself in the foot, as you know,
and amongst other things,
and then filmed shooting herself in the foot, but and then releasing
photographic evidence.
Exactly,
it's never good.
But I remember when a friend of mine who worked with him at Raytheon said to me, "Hey, Jerry, there's a guy that's going to be running for Congress in your area. You should have him into your church." And we were doing a red, white, and blue Sunday. We do that every year at our church. That's usually the Sunday before Independence Day. And this year we have Nathan Hochman. But in 2019 we had Congressman Mike Garcia, and he was a nobody, And wow, has he been a whiz-bang congressman for our district and such a great representation for Southern California.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Watching the progression of Congressman Garcia has been incredible. I can remember seeing him years ago, running, and there was the primary, and there was another Republican candidate in the race. He blows past it, and I have friends up in your area. I have friends in Simi Valley, and it was so funny. Every time I'd be out there on a weekend, I'd see all of these volunteers with Mike Garcia. Their red and white baseball shirts are out there spinning Mike Garcia signs, and everybody looked like they were having so much fun. And I saw that. I thought to myself, that is the power of the grassroots. This guy has grassroots energy behind him, and he's only continued to build it. And they wouldn't be excited about him still if he wasn't delivering for his district on so many, especially economic issues for his district. So I think I'm just so proud to be his friend and to have him on our show, because it is hard to be a Republican in California, and he manages it so well and still represents for a district that is, 12 points in the blue. I mean, I think it's a Biden plus 12 district, but still manages to win because of his output, what he's been delivering. And I think that's incredible. It's been really fun to watch because he's amazing.
Absolutely. In our final moments here, Jennifer, I wanted to talk a little bit about your opportunity to host the Jen and Don show on AM870 back in January of 2015. And obviously, I listen to you on the Inland Empire because I teach at a Bible college in Laverne, and so I live in Acton, so I come all the way down the 138 and then down.
That's a commute. You
That
have
is,
plenty of time to listen to me.
yeah, and so you guys would come on early, so I would listen to you guys at that time, and then obviously Don fell ill and passed away a couple of years ago. I was just wondering,
Yeah.
what kind of impact that had on you, and just kind of, if you would, humanize Don, if you will, for the listening audience.
Oh my gosh, Don Dix was amazing. It was really funny. Just to give you a little brief history of how Don and I actually met. I was kind of up for the job with the Morning Answer and thought that was what was happening, and it ended up that I didn't. So I was filling in at the station quite a bit, and one of our the general sales manager actually at AM570 said, "I really like you. I'm going to do something with you." And we hear that a lot. It was so sweet, but you always think, "Oh yeah, it's kind of like we'll do lunch," right? You don't know that that's going to happen. Well,
Yeah.
Lo and behold, he calls me out of the blue and he says, "I have an opportunity. I want you to host this show. I've got this community activist who's incredible. He's got an incredible voice, and you guys need to meet." And so we met for the first time and really hit it off. We did a test show the first day we met, and it worked out beautifully. And they decided to go ahead with the show. And so as we're getting ready to, we're planning for it in the planning stages right before January of 2015 is when we launched the Jen and Don show. And Don and I were talking on the phone, and he said, "So why do you do this?" And I said, "Well, I'm a radio brat. I love the medium. I love to entertain people. I think it's vulnerable. You get to chat with people when they're in their relaxing moments in their car, maybe not when they're stuck in traffic." And I said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "I want to save California. I want to save the world." And we kind of collided. I taught him radio and he taught me activism. And we just had the most incredible time. We would do things. We'd socialize. We've even done a few trips together. We just became incredibly close. And I used to laugh and call him my radio husband. But it was really significant losing him. And it's still, I tear up a little bit just talking to you right now. I miss him every single day.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun together. We laughed together. We would drive each other crazy. But he was the only person that I know in California at the activist level who's been able to marry the grassroots and the so-called swamp, the establishment. And he did it in Riverside County. And right before he passed, one of his last great achievements is that he delivered Riverside County for the recall of Gavin Newsom and for Larry Elder. And that was incredibly powerful. I think it was the only county in California that did that, but it was because of his work and because of the programs that he really birthed in that area that really made a difference. And I know that if he were still with us today, that maybe California would look a little different. But we're going to keep working in his honor, and I still think about him every day as I'm doing my work. So hopefully the listeners do too.
Absolutely. The last 1 minute here, I want to give you the last word. I found out you were a voiceover artist and have worked on several movies and commercials. None
that you're going to know of.
I'm assuming The Simpsons is not one of those things.
The Simpsons is not one of those things, but I used to do a lot of movies that probably went straight to, as we would say at the time, straight to video. Now everything goes straight to Netflix, and that's great. But there was a company called PM Entertainment, and I did a lot of movies for that group. I think one of them, this is funny, had Anna Nicole Smith in it.
Uh-oh.
And I know, one of her great acting features. And I was showing it to my grandfather, who was hard of hearing, so he could hear me doing the voiceover. I was a radio person, imagine that. And he actually thought that was me on the screen. It was when she looked not quite so wrecked. And he goes, "Oh, that's you." And I was like, no.
Jennifer,
listen.
Jennifer, would you promise to call in again sometime soon?
Absolutely. Anytime you want. Thank you so much, Pastor Jerry. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer Horn, from the Morning Answer and the Inland Empire Answer. You can listen to her every day on AM870 or AM590. This is your holy host saying thanks for tuning in today on Hometown Station. We'll catch you next Wednesday.